They say some houses never die. They breathe, they feed, and they remember. The Blackwood House was one of them. A place that swallowed every scream, every drop of blood, every soul that ever dared to enter. 2 people went inside for 2 different reasons. One to sell it, the other to study it. But the house didn't care who they were. It only cared that it was hungry. And when the walls start to bleed, you'll realize the Blackwood House doesn't just remember the dead. It creates them. 2 terrifying stories of a house that never lets go. Story 1. They said the house remembered every scream, every tear, every drop of blood spilled within its walls, and it wasn't content to just remember. It wanted to relive it. The chipped porcelain doorknob felt cold under my palm, almost damp. I shouldn't have come. Old Man Hemlock's warning echoed in my head, a gravelly whisper about the Blackwood House being sick, about it taking things from people. But I was a realtor, and the Blackwood House was a listing, a spectacularly undervalued listing, sitting on prime land overlooking the valley. My boss, Mr. Davies, hadn't cared about Hemlock's ramblings. He'd cared about commission. The air inside was thick, stagnant, like breathing through cotton. Dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight that pierced the grimy windows. It smelled metallic, not like rust, but something sharper, more organic. I told myself it was just old pipes, old paint. The Blackwoods had abandoned the house 30 years ago, after the incident. Everyone in town knew about the incident, but no one talked about it directly, just hushed tones and averted eyes. I started my walkthrough, forcing a professional cheerfulness into my voice as I narrated into my phone's voice recorder. Charming Victorian, excellent bones, needs some TLC, spacious living room, original hardwood floors. The floors were beautiful, dark oak, but they felt strangely soft underfoot, almost yielding. The living room was sparsely furnished, just a few decaying armchairs draped in white sheets. I pulled one back, and a cloud of dust erupted, revealing faded floral upholstery. As the dust settled, I noticed something, a stain, a dark reddish-brown stain spreading across the fabric like a blossoming flower. I touched it cautiously. It wasn't dry, it was tacky. Minor staining, I mumbled into the recorder, trying to sound nonchalant. Easily cleaned. The kitchen was worse. The linoleum was peeling, revealing a dark, almost black substance underneath. The sink was stained, the cabinets warped and cracked. And that smell. It was stronger here, overwhelmingly metallic. I opened a cupboard, hoping to find something, anything to distract me. Empty, except for a single, tarnished silver spoon. I picked it up. It felt strangely warm. I moved upstairs, each step creaking ominously. The bedrooms were all the same, dusty, decaying, and permeated with that unsettling smell. In the master bedroom, I found a child's rocking horse, its paint chipped and faded. It rocked gently, even though there wasn't a breeze. I stopped recording. "Okay," I said aloud, my voice sounding small and shaky in the silence. "This is getting weird." I decided to finish the walkthrough quickly and get out. I headed for the attic, the last room on the list. The attic door was heavy, resisting my efforts to open it. Finally, with a groan, it swung inward, revealing a dark, cramped space. The air in the attic was colder, heavier. The smell was almost unbearable. I switched on my flashlight, sweeping the beam across the room. Boxes piled high, covered in dust sheets. Old furniture shrouded in shadows. And then I saw it. A large, circular stain on the wooden floor. It was dark, almost black, and it looked wet. like something had been spilled there recently. I knelt down, shining the flashlight directly on it. The stain wasn't just on the wood. It was in the wood. The grain of the floorboards seemed to be bleeding, a slow, viscous seep of dark red liquid. I scrambled back, knocking over a stack of boxes. They tumbled to the floor, spilling their contents. Old photographs, letters, diaries. I grabbed one of the diaries, its cover brittle and cracked. It belonged to Eliza Blackwood, the mother who had lived in the house 30 years ago. I started to read, my hands trembling. The diary entries began normally, detailing the joys of motherhood, the beauty of the valley. But as I read further, the tone shifted. Eliza wrote about strange noises in the house, about feeling watched, about a growing sense of dread. She wrote about the house being hungry. Then came the entries about her son, Thomas. He'd started having nightmares, screaming in the night. He'd become withdrawn, refusing to play. And then the entries about the blood. Eliza wrote about finding small, unexplained stains appearing on the floors, on the walls, on the furniture. She wrote about trying to clean them, but they always came back. The last entry was dated the night before the Blackwoods disappeared. It was frantic, barely legible. "It's taking him," Eliza wrote. "The house is taking my Thomas. I can hear him screaming. And the house, it's laughing." I slammed the diary shut, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to get out of here. Now. I turned to leave, but the attic door had slammed shut. I rattled the knob, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. Then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic dripping sound. I looked up. From the ceiling, directly above the stain on the floor, a single drop of dark red liquid fell. Then another, and another. The house was bleeding. Panic seized me. I screamed, pounding on the door, but no one could hear me. The dripping intensified, becoming a steady stream. The stain on the floor grew larger, spreading across the wood like a malignant growth. And then I noticed something else. The photographs scattered around me. I picked one up. It was a picture of Eliza and Thomas Blackwood, smiling and happy. But as I looked closer, I saw something horrifying. In the background, reflected in a window, was a figure. A shadowy, indistinct figure, standing in the attic. A figure that wasn't there when the picture was taken. I grabbed another photograph, and another. The figure was in all of them, always in the background, always watching. And as I looked at the photographs, I realized something truly terrifying. The figure wasn't just in the background, it was getting closer with each picture. I dropped the photographs, backing away from the stain, from the dripping, from the growing darkness. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for something. When I opened them, the attic door was open. Sunlight streamed in, illuminating the dust motes, dancing in the air. The dripping had stopped. The stain on the floor was gone. Everything was normal. I stumbled out of the attic, down the stairs and out of the house, gasping for breath. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I drove straight to Mr. Davies' office, babbling about the house, about the blood, about the diary. Mr. Davies listened patiently, then sighed. "Look, Sarah," he said, "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but you're letting your imagination run wild. The Blackwood house is a great opportunity. We're going to list it for double the price." I tried to argue, to explain what I'd seen, but he wouldn't listen. He just handed me another listing. I went home, shaken and exhausted. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the stain on the floor, the dripping blood, the shadowy figure in the photographs. Finally, I got out of bed and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. As I stood at the sink, I glanced at the reflection in the window, and that's when I saw it. Standing behind me, in the reflection, was a shadowy figure, a figure I recognized from the photographs, a figure that wasn't there when I turned around. But it wasn't looking at me. It was looking at the silver spoon I'd taken from the Blackwood house, sitting on the kitchen counter. And as I watched, the spoon began to bloom, a dark reddish-brown stain spreading across its surface, like a blossoming flower. And then I understood. The house didn't just remember. It didn't just relive. It transferred. It transferred its hunger, its sickness, its need, to whatever it touched. And I had touched the spoon. And the figure in the reflection, it wasn't Thomas Blackwood, it was Eliza, and she was smiling. Story 2. The house doesn't want to be sold. It doesn't want visitors. It wants to be fed. And it's been a long time since it's eaten. Old Man Tiber, the local historian, smelled of mothballs and regret. He'd warned me, just like everyone else, about the Blackwood house. "Stay away, boy," he'd rasped, his eyes clouded with a fear that seemed older than the house itself. "That place, it breathes, and it doesn't breathe air." I'd dismissed him as a senile eccentric. I was a structural engineer, hired to assess the house's stability before a potential sale. Logic and blueprints were my tools, not ghost stories. The house stood on a slight rise, overlooking the town like a watchful, decaying sentinel. It wasn't grand, not in the traditional sense. It was oppressive. The gray stones seemed to absorb light, and the windows were dark, vacant eyes. Even on a bright autumn day, a chill clung to the air around it. My initial inspection revealed structural issues, certainly. Foundations settling, some rot in the timbers, but nothing catastrophic. The house was solid, surprisingly so for its age. It was the atmosphere that unsettled me. A heavy, suffocating silence, a feeling of being constantly observed. I started taking measurements, sketching diagrams, meticulously documenting everything. The first oddity was the temperature. It was consistently colder inside the house than outside, even in rooms exposed to direct sunlight. My digital thermometer registered a drop of 10 degrees Fahrenheit, just stepping across the threshold. Then came the stains. Not the obvious kind, like water damage or mildew. These were subtle discolorations in the plaster, faint reddish hues on the floorboards. They weren't immediately noticeable, but once you saw one, you started seeing them everywhere. I initially attributed them to mineral deposits, old paint, anything but what my gut told me they were. I spent 3 days at the Blackwood house, working from dawn till dusk. Each day, the feeling of unease grew stronger. I started having trouble sleeping, plagued by vivid, disturbing dreams. Dreams of dark hallways, whispering voices, and a pervasive sense of dread. On the second night, I stayed late, determined to finish my assessment. I was working in the library, a cavernous room lined with decaying bookshelves. The air was particularly cold here, and the smell of dust and decay was overwhelming. I noticed a pattern in the stains. They seemed to concentrate around certain areas, the corners of the room, the base of the bookshelves, the space beneath the large, ornate fireplace. I ran my hand along the fireplace mantel, feeling the cold, smooth stone, and then I felt it, a slight vibration, a subtle tremor beneath my fingertips. It was barely perceptible, but it was there. The house was humming. I dismissed it as fatigue, as my imagination running wild. But then I noticed something else. A small crack in the plaster above the fireplace. It wasn't a new crack, it was an old crack, but it was growing. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the crack widened, revealing a dark, reddish substance beneath. I shone my flashlight into the crack. The light didn't penetrate far. It was swallowed by the darkness. But I could smell it now, a coppery, metallic scent that made my stomach churn. I spent the next day focusing on the foundation, trying to distract myself from what I'd seen. But the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. I kept catching glimpses of movement in the periphery of my vision, shadows flitting across the corners of my eyes. That evening, I decided to research the history of the Blackwood house. I went to the local library, hoping to find some information. The librarian, a stern woman named Mrs. Gable, was reluctant to talk about the house. "Bad things happened there," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Best left alone." But she eventually relented, handing me a stack of old newspaper clippings and historical documents. The Blackwood family had been prominent in the town for generations, but their fortunes had declined in the late 19th century. The house had been built by Silas Blackwood, a wealthy industrialist, in 1888. The clippings detailed a series of tragedies that had befallen the Blackwood family. A fire that destroyed their factory, a series of financial setbacks, and finally, the disappearance of their son, Thomas, in 1993. The official explanation was that Thomas had run away, but rumors persisted that he had met with foul play. The most disturbing document was a handwritten letter from Eliza Blackwood, Thomas's mother, written shortly before her own death. The letter was addressed to a local doctor, and it detailed her growing fear that the house was alive. She wrote about the stains, the cold spots, the strange noises, and her conviction that the house was somehow responsible for her son's disappearance. "It needs something," she wrote. "It's always hungry, and I fear it will not be satisfied until it has taken everything." I returned to the house, armed with the knowledge from the library. The atmosphere was even more oppressive than before. The air was thick with dread, and the silence was deafening. I went back to the library, to the fireplace. The crack in the plaster had grown significantly. The reddish substance was now clearly visible, oozing slowly from the crack, like a viscous fluid. I touched it cautiously. It was warm, almost pulsating. And then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic thumping sound coming from within the walls. It was slow, deliberate, like a heartbeat. I followed the sound, tracing it through the library, down the hallway, and into the dining room. The thumping grew louder with each step. Finally, I reached the source, a large, antique grandfather clock standing in the corner of the room. The clock wasn't ticking. It wasn't chiming. It was breathing. The pendulum swung slowly, rhythmically, and with each swing, the house seemed to pulse in response. I stared at the clock, mesmerized by its hypnotic movement. And then I noticed something else. Wood of the clock was stained, covered in the same reddish hue as the plaster in the library. And the stains weren't just on the surface. They were within the wood, seeping out from the grain. I reached out to touch the clock, and as my fingers brushed against the wood, I felt a jolt of energy surge through my body. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I stumbled backward, gasping for breath. I looked down at my hand. The skin was flushed, almost red, and then I saw it, a small reddish stain appearing on my palm, spreading slowly like a blossoming flower. I understood now. The house wasn't just hungry, it was parasitic. It fed on life force, on energy, on blood, and it had chosen me as its next meal. I tried to run, but my legs felt heavy, leaden. The house seemed to be holding me back, trapping me within its walls. The thumping of the clock grew louder, faster, more insistent. I collapsed to the floor, paralyzed with fear. The stain on my palm grew larger, spreading up my arm, across my chest. I could feel my life force draining away, being absorbed by the house. And And then I saw her, standing in the doorway, watching me with cold, empty eyes. Eliza Blackwood, or what was left of her. She wasn't a ghost, not exactly. She was part of the house now, a conduit for its hunger, a guardian of its secrets. She smiled, a slow, chilling smile that revealed teeth too sharp, too long. And she whispered, her voice a raspy echo from the depths of the house, "Welcome home." The last thing I saw before darkness consumed me was the grandfather clock, its pendulum swinging, its wood-stained crimson, and the house breathing. But the truly horrifying part, my final report, submitted electronically before I succumbed, was flagged by Mr. Davies as remarkably positive. He'd already scheduled the open house, and the first potential buyer, Old Man Tiber, the historian. He'd been looking for a quiet place to spend his final years. The house, it seemed, had found its next caretaker. The end.